Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Berlin, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Teachstone. And I wanted to welcome you to our Charlottesville Regional. I know many of you have traveled long and far, and we look forward to spending the week with you. This is one of the first times we've been able to have an event like this, to bring people together kind of as we kick off the trainings, to really remind us why we're here and remember the power of interactions. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Bob Pianta, who is, as you know, one of the main authors of the class, the Dean of the Curry School of Education, and the founder and chair of Teachstone. And he also was, way back when, one of my dissertation advisors. And so you have, we will have a wonderful evening. I feel like Bob is one of those inspirational voices to really remind us why we all do that tough work that we do every day with parents and children and teachers and directors. And to bring it all together and really remind us about the power of interactions and how those one-to-one, those moment-to-moment interactions benefit kids, but they also benefit the people that we work for. So Bob is going to speak with us for this evening. So thank you very much.
Okay. So the best thing I've ever done was, one of the best things I've ever done, I better be careful with that, the best thing, but to be part of Rebecca's dissertation and help her move along in her career was one of the best things I've ever done. And to help be part of creating this organization that helps so many teachers get access to resources that help them be better resources for kids. So it's a great pleasure to be able to do this tonight. And if I can get this working the way that I would hope it would work, then I will be able to use a remote. But if not, then we'll just proceed. So what I want to do in my time this evening is to kind of run through a lot of the research that goes into the work that we've done over the years that has contributed both to what you're doing currently with moving out into the field and working with class and with professional development, but then to also think about what the research is telling us about where we might go. And how we might be able to move forward. I think one of the things that, you know, this title is important in the way that I think about, and I think Bridget and others think about what it is that we're really trying to do. You know, because if you do look at almost any piece of research on the educational inputs to kids, and you try to carve what is it about those educational inputs that actually matter for kids' learning and development? And you look at, you know, how much money gets spent, or you look at class size, you look at all these different things. And actually, it always comes down to the classroom. Now, families matter huge. What happens in somebody's family matters huge in terms of setting kids up and supporting them throughout their time in school. But of the things that educators control, and of the things that, you know, that involves education, the action is in the classroom, and actually I'd argue that the action is in the interactions in the classroom. So we'll sort of look at. So we take this work started with a focus on really trying to understand children's development. You know, we really were very serious about. I mean, if you work with little kids, this is what you pay attention to. And so how is it that classrooms actually foster the development of kids across a whole range of activities and domains? So we want to start from a starting point of like, what is it that goes on in classrooms that actually helps move the needle on development? Okay, I got to aim it. Okay. And so the fact is, as I said before, that classrooms become sort of the leverage point. You know, if you're really interested in helping move the needle for lots of kids, and I think in my career I've been trying to focus on, you know, particularly kids that are coming from challenging circumstances and moving the needle for vulnerable kids, then to do that for lots and lots of kids, classrooms are really where it is. That's the investment we should be making. And again, the argument, and I think the proof point that you guys are all carrying out, is that it's the humans that are in those classrooms that ultimately make the most difference. So, you know, we'll talk about a number of different topics this evening. You guys have kind of all waded through these topics in various ways, and so I don't want to belabor too many of the points here. But I think it's it's important to keep coming back occasionally. So, you know, I just wrote a chapter that required me to review all of the research that have been done on interactions between teachers and kids, and I don't even do, you know, a tenth of this anymore. And it's very cool to see that the ideas just keep getting reinforced and repeated, that what goes on between teachers and kids is really of great value. So a couple of the issues that are really important to remember. So this is actually a fact. And if you're a parent, you know this. If you're a principal, and if there's any principals, I know, you know this too, but you can't say this to parents. And I think our job is to make that a guarantee. Okay, that's really what I think our job is to make that a guarantee. Because it is a matter of luck, and I'll show you some data at some point. And the ways that we've tried to fix this are all the wrong. They all start with the wrong premise. So we test kids over and over again, you know. And we think, I gave this talk one time in Los Angeles, and it happened the day after the Los Angeles Times had posted all of the test scores that were for every teacher's classroom in the whole city. Okay, so if you're a third grade teacher in Los Angeles, your test scores for your kids were posted on the internet. Okay? And the idea was that, well, if the public knew about good teachers and bad teachers according to test scores, and somehow the public would somehow create some magical process that would make you a better teacher the next year. Like, how does that happen? Okay, there's no way that can happen. And so I think, and part of the reason that doesn't happen is because that's not a feedback loop that helps you in the classroom. So part of this is to also think about what are the ways in which we create supports that help teachers get better. And teachers really do matter. So we talk about interactions matter and teachers matter, but longitudinal study that was done probably about 3 or 4 years ago, actually, followed kids. This is a study from Tennessee, where they actually took kids, all first grade, it was kindergartens and first grade, it was kindergarten teachers. Okay, so they took all the kids in kindergarten and they randomized them into teachers' classrooms. So that meant, if I got randomly assigned as a kid to a teacher, that meant that whatever learning took on, whatever learning I did, could be attributed to that teacher, not to my family, not to what I brought into the classroom, because randomization equalizes everything. All right? So they randomize all kids to teachers, and then they figure out what are the better teachers and worse teachers that kids got randomized to. This was actually a study about class size. But they were able to use it to figure out what were the better and worse teachers. So they figure out what are the better and worse teachers, and then they follow these kids up to their 20, 25 years old. And they find out that if you were lucky enough to get randomized into a teacher's classroom that they thought was a good teacher, and their definition of good teacher is not as good as our definition of a good teacher, that just being in that teacher was worth to you as an individual $320,000. All right, in terms of earnings and reduced expenses on any number of other things. That's an unbelievable effect. Okay, and these are the kind of effects that that the work that we do can produce. Another thing to remember, these are just sort of little fact points that I think create a context for things, but these numbers are actually out of date. But in the early 2000s, somebody did a study to figure out what the average school system in the country pays for professional development. And the figures there were somewhere between $2,500 and $9,000 per teacher. Chicago was spending the $9,000 per teacher per year for professional development. Okay, now people complain about how expensive my teaching partner is, and I want to say it's cheaper actually than what you're doing. You just have to stop what you're doing and put the money to things that will actually work, and that's part of the argument I think that we're trying to make. This figure was just updated though by the new teacher project in a report that they just did, and they're now saying that estimate in most urban systems that have plowed a lot of money over the last years into training is almost $15,000 per teacher per year. You can almost hire another teacher with what you spend on professional development. That'd be an interesting experiment. So again, like I said, I think our mission, the way I view our mission, is to move from luck to guarantee. And that our job is essentially the production of effective teaching and effective teachers. A lot of that work we're doing now in early childhood and in-service kind of teaching. But I think part of what we've got to start thinking about, part of what I've been thinking about, we're working with the leadership of the company to think about, how does this happen internationally? How does this happen in K-12? How does this happen for younger kids? So we need lots of effective teachers. So I don't think I need to make too many arguments like we're going to flip to the early childhood side, but I think one of the arguments we make is that we know very well that poor kids enter school way behind their peers. I just saw a paper on this the other day that I'm reviewing. Even if you made access universal in pre-K, which is one of the arguments that people make, that gap would still exist because what you're doing is basically offering, the upper end of the distribution resources that they wouldn't otherwise get. So that gap is going to be created, it's still there. And quite frankly, the resources that we have in serving kids who are struggling are just not intensive enough in terms of the duration. I think kids need effective quality for a couple of years. They need it full time, and they probably need it 12 months of the year. So we've got to have a level of intensity in that time that that actually closes gaps, not just keeps gaps from getting larger, which is largely what we're trying to do. And if we're going to do that smartly, if we're going to provide kids with intensive enough experience in their classroom, we can't just do it with some of the ways we've tried to do it, which is to take the third grade curriculum and push it down into little kids. So the issue for us is not just access. We spend a lot of time trying to open up lots of rooms. It's access and quality, and that's really where I think we talk about that. So I think we've made this argument a lot. You guys have certainly seen the results of this argument, but in a sense, everything that tees up a kid's success in the first year or two of school, actually, these data it's actually much longer than that, but everything that gets kids ready is a result of relationships that they have prior to that period of time. Most of those relationships are with parents and caregivers growing up, and most of that is with parents. Most of the experience that contributes is with parents. But those relationships create all the kinds of things that kindergarten teachers tell us they love. A kid gets along with other people, can control themselves in the classroom and follow directions, all right, and pays attention and sits still and does a little bit of work when we need them to do work. All that stuff is derivative of the thousands and millions of interactions that go back and forth between a child and a caregiver, usually a parent. So in some sense, when we think about readiness, it's actually, I like to think of this as sort of like readiness. We think of readiness because we can test it. We think of it as a property of a kid that kind of walks along with a kid. It's like, oh, I'm ready. Okay, I'm ready when I sit over here, and I'm ready when I sit over there. But actually, it's not. Readiness is like fluid, right? I'm more ready with these people because they can really connect with me and get me to do the things that I know they think I can really do and that I'm capable of. And I'm a whole lot less ready with this group because they're kind of nasty and hostile and don't engage me in ways that I'd like to be engaged, okay? I'll flip that around. I think we don't fully appreciate how fluid those skills are, particularly for little kids, you know? Everybody in this room has had an experience with a kid who's extraordinarily confident under one circumstance. The same kid goes to the next teacher or the next adult and shuts right down. Okay? We do that as adults. So these properties that we think are fixed are actually fluid, and it's relationships and interactions that unlock those and make those real. And so that it's really important to be thinking about things as sort of fluid. So these relationships and interactions are really part and parcel of both what quality is and what readiness is. So everybody knows this graph, okay? So we set about to try to assess these interactions, right? And we start with this idea that interactions matter, and then we carve them up into these three buckets. We measure it using the class. Everybody knows this, but in fact, the use of the tool and the ways that it's being used, and the idea that you would take something as complicated as social interactions and assign a number. Okay, I'm going to assign a higher number here to what I'm observing and a lower number here was pretty radical at the time we began to do this. It was okay to assign numbers to the height of the mulch in the classroom, or whether you had, you know, a schedule posted on the wall and things like that, but to be able to start assigning more or less value to a human quality is actually a pretty radical notion. But if we take seriously the idea that those human qualities are fundamentally important, then monitoring those and having some way of gauging them becomes very, very important. So you guys know these dimensions and these domains. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about this. One of the studies, I'll talk about a bunch of the studies we've been doing, and that go into the argument for the validity of the class. But one of the things that's really, we've been doing, so the studies I'll talk about are really still organized in those three buckets. But we've done some work in the last couple of years to kind of say there's a common property across all those dimensions that run along the left side there. There's a common property to the dimensions of the class, and that common property has to do with sort of connectedness, the back and forth that a teacher establishes, whether that's focused on emotion or focused on organizing or focused on interaction. There's some engagement, you know, between the teacher and the kid that's really important. And then there are things that sit separately from the engagement. There's kind of what the engagement is actually focused on. You know, is it focused on helping you learn math? Is it focused on helping you sit still in the classroom? And we've done some work statistically to actually, you know, make those things distinctive with one another. And the results are actually fairly interesting, because this general property of interaction actually accounts for kids' development in almost everything that you can measure. So it accounts for their growth and achievement, it accounts for their changes in social development, it accounts for their changes in self-regulation, things like that. So there's this, it's like this general quality of relationships. This withedness is really important for all aspects of development. And then the specific qualities, like I'm focusing on helping you to self-regulate, or I'm focusing on helping you learn reading, actually predicts to those specific areas of performance. So that's like a preview of coming attractions. But that's one of the things that we will not throw away these three domains because there's too much invested in those. But just to let you know, we're sort of working on kind of thinking about these in other ways. So you've seen these, you've probably seen these graphs before, even talked about them, but when you know, it's unbelievable that you can go out, this is now 10,000 classrooms. This started with 1,000 classrooms. We had this graph, and then we kept adding classrooms. And I thought, okay, so we're going to add classrooms in the bar, and I'm going to need to change the graph. I've never needed to change the graph. We're going to go to high school. I'm going to need to change the graph. Don't need to change the graph. We're going to go internationally. I'm going to need to change the graph. I don't need to change the graph. Most, with some degree of variation. But by and large, we create I think this is a statement about the educational context that we have structured for kids. We have created educational contexts in classrooms where they're reasonably nice and positive places to hang out if you're a kid. Okay? They're relatively well organized and they kind of have a rhythm but do they actually stimulate kids' learning and interest and cognition? Not particularly well. Okay? And the teachers are actually given curriculum that don't do that particularly well at all. So this is something that we've seen over and over and over and over again, and I've in now literally dozens of studies, I've been hoping to see something that actually is different than that graph, and we don't see it. And then, this particular study was really important back in the years where we were looking at pre-K, because at this point we were really trying to make the argument that interactions matter, emotional support and instructional support would matter for those aspects of school readiness that are listed on the left side there, and would be more important than the other indicators of quality, because this becomes very important when we think about quality rating and improvement systems. Folks working in that space. So we're trying to understand what are the measures of quality in early education. So we wonder about interactions, and then we wonder about qualities of the physical environment that you can go and observe. And then we wonder about these structural features, the kind of things that governors put into policy. Teachers have a credential or they have a degree. The class size is so big, or the ratio is so much, these sort of things. And by and large, you find out that if you measure kids' learning depends upon the qualities of interaction that are going back and forth that you can observe. Don't really get pushed all that much by those other aspects of the physical environment, and those structural features just simply don't matter at all. But in point of fact, an awful lot of legislation gets written around those structural features, and an awful lot of what you have to deal with if you're a program director is be compliant with the structural features, which unfortunately takes a lot of your time and energy away from the stuff that matters. When we look at whether interactions matter, so we've been able to, for the prior slide, you can show that interactions, that was pre-K. So interactions matter in pre-K. So then the question is, let's follow these kids to the next year, see what happens in the next year. And so let's look at interactions in kindergarten and look at the connection between interactions and outcomes in kindergarten. And we find actually that for kids in pre-K, the quality of your teacher's instructional support for you in pre-K actually matters for your performance at the end of kindergarten year, no matter how good or bad your kindergarten teacher was. That's a huge finding, actually, okay? We very rarely find that kind of, an experience I had before matters longer term, regardless of what happened in the in-between. And, lo and behold, that kindergarten teacher's quality of instructional support also matters. So this gets to this issue of, remember I said about good teachers a matter of luck? All right, so I'm lucky one year, and that good teacher is going to help me get better that 1 year. But for most poor kids, and kids that are struggling, the evidence suggests that you need at least 3 years of an effective teacher before you land, unluckily, in an ineffective teacher, and they don't erase all the gains that you just made. So this idea of getting a teacher more years in a row is really, really important, because these are cumulative effects. Education is a cumulative industry. And most studies show right now that the average decent pre-K program can close the achievement gap by about half. okay? If we ramped up those so that we closed the gap completely in 1 year, we would need to make sure those kids went into an effective teacher the next year, otherwise that gap's gonna open back up. So this becomes an industry in which we need to be thinking about things over time. We need to ensure kids, good teachers over time. I'm gonna just, well, this is, you know, a lot of people have asked about, this is what policymakers get obsessed with this. So you have the 7-point scale. Tell us the number, okay, that is the good classrooms or the good teacher and the ones that are not a good teacher. And it's like, well, this is, we're just obsessed with this. And I'll say that we've analyzed this as much as could possibly be analyzed, as have other colleagues. And generally speaking, if you're looking at the class and particularly instructional support, there is some evidence to suggest that moving to a 3 on instructional support creates a qualitatively different environment in that classroom, just the beginning of 1, okay, than below a 3. Does anybody, you guys know enough about this. Why would that be the case? What happens when you start scoring at a 3? Some of you have been trained in this, so I know this is. What happens when you start? Yeah.
You start asking how and why questions.
You start asking how and why questions, right? That classroom becomes a place where kids' thinking starts getting stimulated. Okay, when you stimulate kids' thinking, then you're actually stimulating their learning. With the 1 and 2, what's happening in a 1 and 2? Rarely. Teachers can be incredibly busy, right? They can be very busy, but most of the responses we ask of kids are sort of yes or no kind of responses. So you can be very active and not learning a doggone thing, okay? So, and this has been shown in a couple of different studies. This becomes really important. I'm going to go back here, sorry. This becomes really important in professional development because what's the average? It's right around a 2. So we want to move people to a 3. We only need to make the move about a point, and we get all these classrooms activated as places that can actually start producing learning for kids. That 1 point difference is something we can do very, very, very confidently with the kind of professional development that we've developed. So that's a pretty big statement to make. If you can kind of begin to pull off ways in which you can move that needle. Because it's not, I think part of what people always think that this is too hard to do, it's too complicated to do, it's too difficult to do. Really what we're doing is just moving people up a little bit, and we hold them there, we try to move them up a little bit again, we hold them there, we move them up a little bit again, we hold them there. That's really all there is to it. And we have the tools that enable us to do this. We know that these interactions are really more, important for kids coming from tougher backgrounds. Again, most of you have seen this, but this becomes a very, remember when I said it's a matter of luck. So here, you've got 1,300 kids going to 1st grade, and they just sort themselves by matter of luck into teachers who we've rated as low, middle, or high on instructional support. And high on instructional support is not particularly high, okay, in this study. And then we look at kids who come from families where the mom has a college degree or above, and kids where mom doesn't have a college degree yet. So the kids who come from families with a mom with a college degree, these kids are like shot out of a cannon. It doesn't matter what classroom you go to, they're going to read whatever, because mom and dad are making sure that happens. But those kids that are coming from parents where there's less resources around education for those parents, they're more vulnerable in whatever ways, they're paying attention to a lot of other stuff they got to manage, those kids really need those better teachers. Because when they get those better teachers, they're learning at exactly the same rate as those kids coming from much more advantaged classrooms. So that's the point about I can be over here and I can perform at this level, and I can be over here and I can perform at that level. But remember, that's a matter of luck. Okay, we're not guaranteeing that. And then we have the same thing when you go into an emotionally supportive classroom and you're a kid that your kindergarten teacher says, no problems, this is a great kid, glad to pass him on. The first grade teacher is saying, yeah, those are the kids I want. And that's what happens in terms of their reading achievement at the different levels of emotional support. But those kids where the kindergarten teacher says, look out for this kid, this is going to be a challenge. Those kids, again, their achievement, their reading achievement in first grade is dependent on the qualities of the emotional support that teacher is providing in first grade. And the same rule is true. If you luck into one of those classrooms where the interaction value is very high, you're going to learn just as much. And if you don't luck into that classroom, good luck. Because that means at the left end of that scale, that means actually the achievement gap is growing larger for those kids. So here's some work I've been really interested in building out. So that's, most of you guys know the stuff that I just talked about, but some of the stuff we're really starting to try to understand. I have a grant in on this actually as we speak, is to say there's a lot going on with kids and with teachers that we probably need to understand more of when we're trying to understand the qualities of interactions that go back and forth. And some of these some of the qualities that we want to know more about are biological processes that have something to do with brain development and with kids' behavior in the classroom. So one of these processes is cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone. And we secrete cortisol when we're under some kind of stress. Okay? And cortisol gets to be very important in a lot of different ways because it essentially when it's over-regulated, when you have too much cortisol and it washes into the brain, it actually inhibits aspects of brain development that have to do with the connection of your problem-solving brain with your emotional brain. Okay? What's the challenge of most preschoolers? Emotion, and it's learning the problem solving, right? It's also the problem of most adolescents and some adults that I know. But this is your first whack at it when you're a preschooler, okay? It's your first whack at it. And you're trying to build those connections for the very first time. And cortisol actually inhibits those connections from being made. So a couple of things that we know about this. So cortisol is not a good thing. We want to keep it down, right? So kids who are in childcare and preschool actually just by virtue of being there exhibit higher levels of cortisol. It's a stressful circumstance for almost all kids. Sorry, I had my kids cried when I dropped them off in daycare. I think the person that was taking care of them was much nicer than I was, but somehow it was still stressful. But what we find here is the emotional sensitivity of teachers helps moderate that effect and helps cortisol decline over the course of the day. So this teacher's behavior towards kids is changing the way biological processes work for kids. It's really, really important. Okay? And interestingly, okay, teachers' cortisol matters. Okay? So teachers who show high levels of cortisol, actually, this predicts more negative interactions. It actually predicts less sensitivity in interactions with kids. And, in fact, interrupts the effects of interactions on kids' outcomes. So teacher stress is not a good thing. This is why some of the work we're doing now on teacher mindfulness is to try to help teachers. This is like the mindfulness work that's being done right now is so simpatico with the work that we're doing on interactions, because mindfulness both for teachers and kids is helping sort of lower stress levels in the classroom. So we created a banking time, this intervention that increases teachers' behavioral sensitivity to kids. This is a different intervention than my teaching partner. It's just a way of getting teachers to work with kids one-on-one. It increases their sensitivity. It focuses on reading kids' cues. What we find is that when we train teachers to be more sensitive in their behavior with kids, it lowers cortisol for the teachers, lowers cortisol for the kids, and then lo and behold, we see, and this was actually done with kids that were identified as being uncooperative and disruptive. These uncooperative and disruptive kids, we lower their stress, and they become more cooperative, more engaged, and more likely to be affiliative toward the teacher. So this is just a bigger point to say that what we're working on in interactions, you know, people talk about the brain and they talk about brain development, and brain is the reason for doing all this work that we're doing. The work you're doing affects brains, and it affects the physiology of the people that are involved in that work, and it affects it in the ways that we would expect it to be the case. You support teachers, their stress goes down. Okay? You provide kids with opportunities to have a teacher that's supportive and sensitive to them, their stress goes down. Lower stress, increased cooperation, increased learning. It's not rocket science, but it actually works the way that we would predict. We're actually starting a study, I hope, in the next couple of years, where we would monitor kids' cortisol, we would monitor their heart rate, we would monitor their galvanic skin response, you know, a whole bunch of physiological reactions, and we would also monitor those for the teacher, and we would monitor those for all the kids in a classroom, and we would also do real-time video, because I want to know what the teacher does at any given moment that is creating a ripple effect for a kid physiologically, and how we see the consequences of that transpire over the course of the day. Okay, so right, interactions matter. It's your job to improve them at scale. So I think the way that we have tried to approach the improvement question is really, really important, and it really, you know, and I think this is something that we, you know, that we continue to have to pay attention to. There's a reason why $9,000 worth of professional development money doesn't add up to any impacts for a teacher and for a kid. And I think in part, it's one of the reasons is no one's really thought about, if I give workshops over here to you guys, how is that workshop actually translating into a difference in your teaching and a difference in kids' learning? I get reinforced just for giving you the workshop, and you get reinforced just for attending the workshop. And we haven't really thought through the design. What is the mechanism that's responsible for me delivering professional development that translates into actual differences in the classroom and differences for kids? I think we've done that in a way that no one else has. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why we see the effects of it. The other thing that's really important is we've gone out and we've tested these in experiments. So we've taken teachers and we've randomly assigned them to this professional development or that professional development. We just haven't said, oh, come, you know, we'll find out if you're satisfied with the professional development. That'll be our indicator of whether the professional development works or not, okay? We've actually tried to test these things in experiments. And so, you know, when you think about this, again, I think most of this as an engineering problem. I don't think of this as a almost, it's an education problem, but it's also an engineering problem. We think we know, we have pretty good evidence that interactions change kids' learning. So then we want to change teachers' interactions, okay? Well, if you were to change teachers' interactions, what would you use as a target? Well, let's use the class, because we've been able to show the class relates to kids' learning. So that becomes our focus for professional development. And how would we then what would we do with teachers? Well, I guess we probably should train them in what we're talking about. They should get some knowledge about interactions. They should get some ability to observe interactions, and maybe it probably helps if they observe other people's interactions and they observe their own. That's really what what the professional development has been designed. And you know, so you guys have seen all these things. This is the video library, the old version. This is, you know, an example of an annotated video. When we created these annotations to the video library, a couple of things were really important to us. We thought it was really important that, you know, we use a lot of video. We as a company use a lot of video, the field uses a lot of video. And if I was doing work with you guys as a group of teachers, I might show you half an hour worth of video. And I'd say to you, tell me what the teacher's doing here. Tell me what's making her effective. And you would all come to that with 4 different views of what this teacher is. And we would spend, you know, an hour and a half, you know, sorting through that video, and we probably wouldn't sort of go anywhere with that conversation. We'd have a nice conversation, but we wouldn't really get into the nitty gritty. So one of the things we thought was really important was to say, I'm going to show you a minute and a half of video, and I want you to tell me if interactions matter, then you're going to be able to find it in that minute and a half, okay? We're going to constrain your viewing field. And we're also going to give you some labels for interactions using the class as the labeling system. So these annotations are really kind of like mini reliability trainings for teachers, because it tries to drive their attention to the moment-to-moment interactions that a coder and a trained observer of the class would be able to see and respond. And then, you know, we created the My Teaching Partner coaching cycle as a way to kind of have a deeper conversation with a coach around the video, and to create a structure in which a teacher could see herself interacting with kids and respond to that video in a way that would, you know, kind of help her deepen her understanding of what she's doing with kids. And that first, the first My Teaching Partner video clip that focuses on nice work, nice job, is really important, because we want teachers to we want them to come back again, right? We don't want them to think, oh, the first thing I want to see is how bad I am, okay? Because they're kind of nervous anyway. So we want to build a coaching relationship that is built upon not an affective experience that the teacher will engage, but it's also important because it's important that the teacher is able to see herself doing something well, to actually visualize the thing that she wants to accomplish. Anybody taking lessons in any sort of sport or personal trainer, anything like that? No? What are you doing?
Dance.
Dance, okay? Congratulations. You're a better man than I am. Does your dance instructor ever say something like you should visualize yourself?
Sure.
Okay, that's it. This is it. You need to be able to visualize it, because in part having that mental image of yourself doing the thing actually helps you do the thing in the real life circumstance. So that idea of being able to see over and over again what the thing is actually pretty important. All right, so you know, you guys have probably seen this, but the first randomized trial we looked at, this is language modeling observed over the course of the year. This is the control group. The teachers who got coached moved on average about a point. Remember how we talked about how important that point was? Okay, that has happened, that result, over and over, every single time we've done a trial with My Teaching Partner. Preschool, high school, middle school, math, science, little kids, it's produced at least that effect. Okay? Coach teachers, they get that. Okay? Take kids that are more vulnerable and teachers that are more stressed. So we're doing this now, the same graph, in a classroom in which 100% of the kids in this classroom are poor. So we're using that as a proxy for a more vulnerable, stressed classroom. Okay, what's happening there? That's actually significant. What's happening there? Yeah, it's a significant decline in the quality of interactions over the course of the year. And actually you see that over and over again. And coaching produces even a bigger effect in that group than it produces in the sort of typical classroom, because there's this kind of, it seems like this general pattern of the more vulnerable the kid is or the more vulnerable the teacher is, provide them some resources that help with that vulnerability, and you actually see a bigger effect than you would in a class, in a teacher or for a kid where you don't have that level of vulnerability. All right, so we see these effects on teachers that, you know, we get the coaches, and then the kids, not surprisingly, as soon as I get the kids who have those teachers show greater gains in literacy, better self-regulation. We actually see lower rates of special education enrollments, which is something that you know, school administrators care about a lot because those are expensive. Okay, I'm just going to kind of skip ahead. We did this. We then went ahead and did this big study with 500 teachers, where we built a course. Okay, around, this is sort of the first version of MMCI. If you do making the most of classroom interactions, it's like, okay, what can we take and put into a course, like a course that I might teach in a college setting that would try to do this. So we're not coaching teachers, and we're not going out in their classrooms. We just got them sitting around in an environment like this. We're saying, okay, what can I do with you in this environment that might change what you do with kids out there? So we thought, well, let's teach you about interactions, and let's teach you to be good observers. Let's teach you to be able to see the interactions that we are talking about and distinguish between good and bad, okay? So make those distinctions between a 5 and a 2. You don't have to be as precise as somebody who's reliable, but you got to be able to at least say, that's better than that. Okay? And let's see if we can do that with people in a college course. And so we did a bunch of different assessments of those teachers after they took the course. So we assessed them both right after the course and a year later. Another important thing, this was a randomized study. So we took teachers who were taking courses and randomized them in college into our course or the sort of business as usual. This never happens in college. I'm a dean of a school of education. I can tell you how hard it is to try to do this. Nobody wants, do I really want my course to be tested for its impact in a randomized trial? You've all been in college, you know, we know, you probably taught a few of these things. I definitely don't want that to happen. So but part of the issue is that the bar that we've set for ourselves is really high. Okay? And so these teachers, not surprisingly, they indicate, stronger beliefs in effective teaching. They show knowledge of interactions, and they show observation skills, not just right after the course, but those skills stay with them a year later. But the important thing is that just a college course changed how they interacted with kids in classrooms. We never went out in those classrooms. We just taught this course. And those teachers were more emotionally supportive with kids right after they took the course. And they demonstrated much greater degree of instructional support. That effect is actually worth a 1 point on the class. Okay, so the course produced a 1 point effect. Not just a year late, not just right afterward, but we still have a third of that effect remaining a whole year later, which is really, this is really kind of an amazing effect. This was like, when we found this was like, wow. And what we try to do is understand, why did that course have that effect? Why did the course affect instructionally supportive interactions? And basically a good chunk of that effect was due to training teachers to be able to see interactions effectively. That thing in the middle is something I am quite convinced that we can assess, and it can become a way of hiring teachers. Wouldn't you want to hire teachers that were likely to be more effective or not? And we have evidence here that teachers who score higher on this are actually more effective in the class. And I think you can actually train this thing completely online. I think we can train this skill without putting people through a whole college course and doing all that. I think you can just be trained in an online environment. Okay, the important thing that we learned for the course was this very last point. Those observation skills can be trained. That's So again, we have another evidence of how flexible and malleable these systems are. We can actually move the needles that we need to move. Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead. Okay, the important point here was in the first trial of my teaching partner coaching, this was all UVA hired coaches that I hired, and we went ahead and did the coaching, the results I showed you before. This here is in 10 different sites all across the country, local coaches, just like the kind of work you guys do, all right? And actually bigger effects, to be honest with you. Bigger effects on instructional support and the other aspects of teacher-child interaction. That's, again, a one-point effect on the class as a result of those teachers being coached by local coaches supported by somebody central. So that was a big finding with respect to thinking about how this might scale. Because an awful lot of that $9,000 per teacher that's going to professional development is going to coaching. It's just not going to the right kind of coaching. It's going to just generic kinds of stuff where teachers and coaches hang out, which might be important, but okay. So then we did a thing. This is a very cool analysis. So it's okay. What is it about coaching that's effective? Okay, and we tried to figure this out. Why this? Okay. Okay. So basically, there are two ingredients to coaching. Okay. There's the video that the coach posts of you. All right. So I'm being coached in my teaching partner, and you're posting video of me. All right. And then you're also giving me prompts. You're also writing prompts and say, look at this, and say something, and send me a response about this. That's the coaching back and forth. And you do that across all three class domains. You might get a prompt about emotional support on an emotional support video. I might get a prompt about instructional support. What we were interested in was, okay, if these teachers are changing over the year in their behaviors in the classroom, their class scores are going up, then are those class scores going up? Are they maybe going up because of how much dosage the teacher's getting on the video, or how much the prompt is? Is there some way of us being able to sort of sort out, is it the video or is it the prompt? Because it would matter a lot if we could figure out how to do this more cheaply. If it's only video, I'll just feed you video. But if it's prompts, then I have to have somebody writing those prompts, and that's a little more a bigger deal. So we're looking at what changed across time, and we basically see this general pattern of the higher dose you get of either video or prompts, the more you go up. Okay, so that's like taking an antibiotic. You need to keep taking the dose till you kill the germ. But we actually also find, sort of like an antibiotic, for the prompts. If you want to change instructional support, you need instructional support won't change just by watching video. You need the prompts. Okay? You need somebody talking to you about instructional support, what it is, what it isn't, and what you're doing in that video that is instructional support, and how you need to do it better. So there's a way in which instructional support changes if there's a more intense kind of focus to the coaching. But there's a point at which you don't get any effect thereafter. So after about 15 prompts, that you've changed about as far as you're going to change that year, and more prompts aren't going to help you. So it's like you took your antibiotic, you're done with it, done. Okay. Whereas if you want to change emotional support, actually all you really need to do is show teachers emotionally supported video, the video of emotionally supported classrooms. That's it. They change their emotional support. After they accumulate about 16 minutes worth of watching these videos, then we see this increase, and it keeps going up. Okay, and it goes up thereafter. So this is the kind of stuff that we're trying to begin to kind of sort out a little bit. Like what are the components that actually are responsible for some of these changes? All right, let me just skip through here and then we'll see these effects on kids' outcomes. Okay, we've done this in high school. What I just described, we've done in high school. This is very cool. We've done this now in 2 studies in Virginia. Teachers get the coaching in the video library. This first study, we used 100 classrooms, we randomized them. All content areas, so if you teach in the later grades, everybody says, well, interactions are important. But the most important thing is the content, okay? Don't tell me about being nice to kids in the classroom. It's the math, okay? Or it's the social studies. It's got to be rigorous, all right? Well, what we found was that if you coach teachers only about their interactions, you don't talk about math, you don't talk about science, you don't talk about social studies, lo and behold, the teachers get better. They improve their instruction. The kids get more attentive and engaged that first year. In the second year, if you follow the teachers into the second year, the year after coaching, no more coaching, the teachers start the second year where they ended the first year. So the teachers who got coached are still better than the teachers who didn't get coached. In that second year, those kids on the Virginia State Standards Test jumped 10 percentile points, which would have been responsible at the time for every single, it was a level that would have been responsible for every single school in the state to make annual yearly progress in a year in which most schools did not make annual yearly progress. So the average student with a teacher improved 10% rank points, and they improved regardless of whether it was a math or a science or a social studies or an English teacher. So content might be important, but interactions matter, and they matter in high school. They matter for kids' performance in content. We're finding the exact same thing in another study, another city. And in fact, in the second city, what we're finding is one of the huge problems in secondary education is most of the teaching workforce in urban areas is white. And most of the kids are either Latinos or African Americans. And there's huge disproportionality in the amount of discipline, particularly exclusionary discipline, in white teachers teaching Latino and African American kids. Those African American kids, particularly boys, are being thrown out of class and being put into sort of essentially a pathway of escalation where you end up, those kids get suspended from school and excluded from school. This is a terrible thing that happens and actually is reducing the amount of resources that those kids are able to get. Okay, we take teachers, we give them my teaching partner, they improve their interactions with kids. The rates of exclusionary discipline practices on the part of those teachers who were coached go to zero. Okay? So you eliminate the racial discipline gap, harsh discipline gap, as a result of just training teachers to interact with kids more effectively. No surprise, right? I mean, we've all seen those kind of episodes. All right. Bridget will probably talk about this a lot more when she talks, if you guys are around later in the week. But the next real move, one of the things that we're thinking about a lot, I know you guys have thought about this a lot at Teachstone, is kind of how to begin to build an online environment. So we've tried to create this online course that actually enhances teachers' ability to see, remember that importance of seeing, practice, and to create some kind of emotionally supportive context for change. Through this rhythm of kind of looking at online content, I'm quite convinced that almost all of what we do with the course, with coaching, can be built into and baked into. I think we can bake professional learning communities into online environments, and we can create within that the interaction that takes place in an online environment an opportunity for lifting an awful lot of teachers' skills through crowdsourcing, through a lot of other ways in which we can build engagement and ways of moving teachers ahead. So that's just one way. That cycle is one way that Bridget has built this online course, and so teachers get to learn about the class, they get to practice through a bunch of tagging activities, whether they can see examples of effective behavior, and then begin to make observations of other people. So when I talk about this, I try to remind people that what we thought was so hard, okay, watching something in classrooms that seems complicated and overwhelming, it's feasible. You guys have proved at Teachstone certainly that we can do this at scale. Tens of thousands of people tens of thousands of pairs of eyeballs can now see classroom environments consistently. This is itself kind of a stunning way of sort of saying there can actually be standards for how this field performs. You know, in other mature fields, there are standards in engineering, there's standards in medicine, and we should have those kind of standards in the field that we're in. I think we're proving that. What's really cool is that the work in K-12 is confirming pre-K. This skill of seeing and labeling seems really important. We need to work more on sort of understanding the dosage of inputs that people need in order to be effective. And thinking through, you know, really how we build systems that sort of bolt together observations and professional development resources that actually move the needle, that we can create a case for not all coaching. Not coaching is great, but not all coaching is worth the money that you're paying them. You know, and there are ways that coaching can be effective, and that we really create, you know, ultimately, I hope, we begin to participate in a series of structures that incentivize and provide teachers credentials for skills that they're acquiring rather than just credits, academic credits. And I'm really excited about the opportunities to redesign teacher preparation. So that's it. I probably went on longer than you guys had hoped, but that's what I had. So thanks for paying attention. I'm glad to answer some questions. We want to do that, or we want to just drink, or do both? Yeah, let's ask some questions and let's drink at the same time. So, if you please feel free to go over to the bar and get another drink. And I'm glad to take any questions or thoughts that you have about anything else. Yeah.
Something I think you answered. I want you to just maybe give me the answer again. But sometimes I've had people tell me in training that have we set the bar too high? Has been the question I've gotten, particularly about instructions.
Yeah.
And tell me some thoughts on that.
Well, I have two thoughts about whether, let's just talk about instructional support being, you know, so it's an average of a 2. You know, it is what it is. It is the product of the system that we built. So one of the things I say to people is, first, you know, if you look at the distribution, there aren't a ton of people up there at 5 or 6, but there are people up there at 5 or 6, and you'd want your kids in those kids' classroom, those teachers' classroom, and you would not want your kid in the kid. And if you went into a classroom you were grade a 1 or 2, you don't want your kid there. So that's the reality. And so it's unfortunate that we are dealing with, you know, essentially the product. Our entire goal is to move it. Now, had we not been able to show that professional development can't change instructional support, you know, if it was like we're doing everything we can and it's not moving, then I'd really worry about the fact that we'd set the bar too high. Or we'd set the bar in the wrong place or around the wrong thing. But this does seem to be malleable, it's movable. And so, you know, I think we need to be thinking of this in terms of relative terms, you know, and so we may be here, but we can get here, you know, and we're just starting down this path. You know, I haven't coached a teacher for 2 years yet. I don't know if I can move somebody a point 1 year and a point another year. I don't know if some kind of teachers can go from a 2 to a 5, or they're only going to get to a 3. You know, we don't know any of these questions yet. But it doesn't mean that we should stop doing what we're doing because we're worried about the bar being too high. You know, I think that's probably the way I can try to reply to that. Other questions? Yeah.
Sarah Hoffman here at Curry has done a lot of research on the effects of responsive classroom.
Yep.
And how its impact on improving student achievement. So I was just wondering if you all had considered, because the big premise behind responsive classroom is building relationships.
Yeah, sure.
And so I was just wondering if you all had considered maybe using the class tool to look at the types of interactions that are taking place within classrooms where the teacher has been trained in the responsive classroom approach, just to see, you know.
Yeah, Sarah's actually, she's done a bunch of studies doing that, and responsive classroom basically has impacts on improving class scores, as you're suggesting. In fact, which is really, this is an important point, because if we believe that interactions are important, and those interactions are important because they're helping kids develop better and learn more in classrooms, then it's not just my teaching partner and MMCI. You know, it's not just professional development that we might have cooked up that's actually helping teachers interact better and help kids learn more. Something like responsive classroom that's well aligned, you know, philosophically and sort of theoretically with the class, is creating classrooms that are more active environments for promoting kids' learning, and it's having the kind of effects that we would anticipate. I think a lot of this is, you know, when we think about, so you think about that, that stuff. I've gotten to this point where I kind of sit down and I watch classrooms. I can watch for about 30 seconds. I can tell you whether something's going on here or not. You know, and a lot of you probably feel that way too if you've been in a lot of classrooms. You know whether it's going someplace, or you know whether it's not going someplace. You probably don't need 3 hours, as much as we're going to train people to do that. You know, I think what the professional development that we're doing, that we're coaching, that Sarah's done on responsive classroom, and that there are others, are taking these environments and then making them. The reason you can tell whether it's going somewhere or not is it's really sort of the sniff test is this place an active agent of learning, or is it just the teacher and the kids are colluded in the way that says, I'm not going to press you too hard, you just don't, and you don't act up, we'll be fine for this 50 minutes. And it's the places that are active agents of learning. And I think what our professional development is doing is moving teachers into being able to see how they can be active agents of learning, and kids can then have those experiences. And responsive classroom is a great example of that. Other questions? Yes.
I come from a Head Start program, and before peer review, we did a lot of training on instructional support and did see significant growth, which was really good. But looking at the scores, and they've kind of maintained, how do you feel about the class being part of DRS?
Yeah, I get that question a lot in Head Start context. You know, I think about it in a couple different ways. I think there's pretty good case to be made, and it's not just me making that case. I think it's a pretty good case to be made that if you were trying to focus on the value of Head Start, of a Head Start classroom experience for the learning that those kids, you know, and the experiences that those kids need to thrive, then paying attention to what the teachers are doing with the kids is a more important thing to be paying attention to than a lot of the other stuff we've been paying attention to. So I think that itself is important. Excuse me. I think the other point that's important in this context is we haven't helped Head Start teachers. We've overwhelmed Head Start teachers with 50,000 regulations that they're supposed to, and directors with 100,000 regulations. Instead of helping them focus on the stuff that they know matters and that the kids will experience as matter, you know. This is the problem with QRISs. You know, there's how many 50 indicators when, you know, 40 of those indicators don't really matter. So helping Head Start teachers and the system focus on stuff that matters. I don't care whether it's just class or class and a few other things or some other replacement for class, but it better be what teachers are doing with kids in that environment. Helping them focus on that is a really important thing to do. The initial assessments, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the initial assessments that, you know, that showed we're really low on this and we're okay here is not surprising given the fact that we haven't focused on, you know, what is early childhood education focused on for the last 30 years? How to be nice with kids, create a warm and sensitive environment, and organize it around a schedule. And then pay attention to all the other stuff in the room. The kid, just set them loose at the sand table and they'll learn. Well, yes and no. You know, they're only going to learn if you're involved in really helping them learn. And I think what we're doing is seeing some of the effects of that. It's going to take years to move that. And so part of this is, can we as a field tolerate the fact that this is a multi-year project, you know, it's not, and it's gonna be every year for multiple years that you've gotta keep the sort of pressure on the system to kind of keep moving forward. This is what the reason why I think standards are important, and we keep people focused on a set of standards so that you move a lot of classrooms and a lot of settings in a direction, rather than do what I'm afraid we will do, or we do a lot of times, is say, well, that didn't get us the result we needed to in 1 year, and let's start this next thing. We'll try this thing, which would be a disaster, I think. And I don't mean that just because it's I just mean that's what we do in education all the time.
Do you foresee in the future bringing this into the curriculum at the college level at the School of Education?
You betcha.
Because
Yep.
right now we're fixing old teachers.
Yeah.
And I'm an old teacher, so.
Yeah, I think you should tell this to my colleagues at Teachstone.
So right now we're fixing old teachers, but we continue to put broken teachers out into the
Yeah,
community.
so imagine if you were being trained in an industry, you know, imagine if you were being trained as a machinist, you know, or imagine you were being trained as a physician. You'd think they would, you know, that the training that you got in higher education would be irrelevant to the stuff that you were doing later on. They'd probably train you in how to operate this machine or how to do this operation. That's probably what they would do. And I think, you know, higher education runs by, you know, almost an entirely different set of rules. And what's interesting is the politics of this are changing in such a way so that increasingly teacher preparation programs are being held to account for producing some outcome other than credit hours, or degrees. And I think we're getting to the point where I think we can be first movers in this space. Yeah, I'm really interested in this. I think that's actually going to be easier to do in an online world,
Yes.
because you can build it outside of the, you can build it outside of institutions like mine. You know, you can just have it out there. And I think it's also going to be easier to do in other countries, where the systems are a little more fluid. Yes.
So I actually want to take that question and even expand it further. With being with Head Start, we now have 270 recipients of the early Head Start Child Care Partnerships.
Mhm.
Are you looking to do that as well into that arena since you've got the infinite time class now?
Yes, exactly. No, so that would be the vehicle for expanding down into settings that are serving toddlers. Yeah, and it's figuring out. Part of what we got to figure out is what are the credentials that are valuable to that system, and beginning to figure out ways that participants are getting, in some sense, some incentive to participate in that kind of PD, because that's going to be the driver. You know, up to now, the driver's been credit hours and degrees, and we got to figure out how we change the drivers to actual competencies and knowledge that's, you know, and ways of certifying those competencies.
You mentioned a lot about the pre-K and K through 12, and with the START infant and toddler program, are you studying that and really looking at the short and long-term impact, so that it really increases the resources and investment in the serve the community?
Yeah, so there's a couple of studies. So the Head Start Faces included class a couple iterations ago. So when they do the follow-up to Head Start Faces, the initial Head Start Faces or Baby Faces, was 2-year-olds in early Head Start. And so initially that helped validate the toddler class and said that kids who were in programs serving 2-year-olds, if the teachers were, you know, better in the class, the kids were learning more. So we got to wait a few years before those kids get old enough to be able to, you know, sort of have the same kind of argument about, yes, interactions matter when you're 2, these kind of interactions matter. This is an assessment that seems to get at them. So we're just trying to build that base. I just saw a study somebody shared with me about it had something to do with it was the equivalent of following kids from kindergarten to 5th grade. It was just showing, you know, sort of a little longer term effect at that age group. But we got to get it at their age group for sure. Other questions? Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. So I was just listening to some of the things that you all been saying, and I'm thinking about the state of Georgia, and I work for a head start agency as well, and I teach at a college. However, I'm thinking about feedback within a timely manner and following up with them to ensure that they're getting and gleaning what we wanted them to receive. And so when we ourselves lack those skills and we're responsible for educating others, then we're not helping them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's the same thing that we observe in classrooms, we're replicating at higher ed. It's the same thing. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, thank you for making that point.
Can we talk a little bit more about the relationship piece developing or expanding through online? I'm a former principal in Baltimore City Schools, and now I'm a coach for
Yeah.
Head Start. And, you know, so I totally agree with everything you said around discipline and relationships and the differences between teachers who don't understand that versus the ones who get it. I mean, it's huge. But when we're talking about building relationships as a coach, you know, I've spent the entire month of September, didn't do any formal operation. I was just building relationships with my teachers. But I'm struggling with how could I have done that online?
Oh, yeah, sure, I understand, yeah.
And maybe
No,
that's just me.
No, look, we did this first My Teaching Partner study, and we said, okay, we're gonna take preschool teachers, and we're gonna coach them online. And all that's gonna be online. The coach is never personally going to meet the teacher, you know? And people said, you're crazy, this will never work, you know? But, you know, doctors do this all the time, okay? Doctors do this all the time. So I thought, well, we'll take a whack at it, because those poor teachers in Southwest Virginia are never gonna get coached, you know, unless we figure out a way to get them online. So we paid a lot of attention to this, you know, that first video, you know, the first session of coaching is very much around tell me about your classroom, and it's very sort of active listening oriented. It's not trying to coach the teachers, and then sort of says, okay, this is how this is gonna work. You know, and that first video is always a video that affirms that teacher's behavior in the classroom. And so we were very careful to assess whether the teachers who never met their coach felt that they had a good relationship with that coach. And they were, you know, the ratings go from 1 to 5, they nailed a 5 every single time. Because partly is, you know, when, you know, we know this as educators. You're in that classroom, and if somebody's listening to you and attending to you and be there regularly for you, that's really valuable, you know. And so it helps break down that isolation. I wouldn't say that it necessarily replaces, but one of the things that also happens in the online environment, and I think this is important. So right now, how much money do you think, I don't know the answer to this, but it'd be interesting to know the amount of money that's being plowed into coaching between early childhood and K-12. It's got some staggering amount of money, right? And most of that is the teacher comes in, she's stressed, okay? The coach sits in and tries to go through, and we're talking about whatever just made you stress as a teacher. If we have a half hour together, 25 minutes of that is sort of working through your stress. I have not studied these things, but I would almost be willing to guarantee that. So there's not much of a structure to that. What the interesting thing is, what the online environment does is force you to structure and focus on particularly salient things. We seem to guess right on what we should have been then focusing on. So I think there's pros and cons. I wouldn't agree with you more. And I would really worry, these teachers wouldn't stick with us if they didn't feel like there was some relationship back and forth with that coach. So something's happening there, and I think there's, you know, the trade-offs are a little bit more artificial relationship for a more standardized and focused approach versus probably something that may even feel deeper and more connected, but may not be as systematic for pushing the needle for that teacher. So, you know. Okay, I think we can drink.